The SEC became the nation's best conference because of its strength at the line of scrimmage and its speed on the perimeter. Somewhere along the way, though, the SEC began attracting the best quarterbacks as well, and that's certainly the rule in the conference this year. Very strong crop of quarterbacks from top to bottom. Not too many weak links, and it's especially crowded at the top. We'll get into the top SEC quarterbacks today on this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer, joined today by Kevin Brockway of the Gainesville Sun. Kevin does a great job covering the Gators for the USA Today Network. We're going to talk to Kevin some about Florida's upcoming season and this pivotal moment for Billy Napier. Seems like Billy Napier's been in a pivotal moment for about a year and a half now. We'll also talk about my recent SEC quarterback rankings that published over at usatoday.com, going 1 through 16 throughout the SEC's quarterbacks. So Kevin, welcome in. Before we get to Florida, let's start with the quarterbacks in this conference. Florida's obviously got a good one in DJ Lagway, coming off of a shoulder injury, rehabbing this offseason. Before we get to my rankings, what's the situation with DJ Lagway? Obviously, one of the more talented players in this conference when he's healthy. He flashed that last year, but what's sort of the situation in his recovery with his throwing shoulder?
Well, Blake, as you know, he did not throw live during spring drills, or obviously we didn't see him. And in the in the spring game, he handed off ball off 5 times, and apparently that was eating him up inside because he really wanted to, but it was almost protecting him against himself in terms of putting him on some level of a pitch count because of how banged up he was at the end of last season. Now he's throwing in OTAs. I talked to him last week. He says everything is going fine, but I think the jury is still out until we see him when practices fully start in late January. So, it's one thing to be throwing, but what kind of DJ Lagway are we going to see? Are we going to see a DJ Lagway that's going to be throwing ropes 40 yards down the field the way he did last year? And I think that's what the fall is going to be about. And I think there'll be a progression up to that, leading up to that, to make sure that they're cautious and that he is going to be fully ready and be the 100% DJ Lagway when the season starts August 30th against Long Island University.
Yeah, and I guess we'll segue now to my quarterback rankings, because I had DJ Lagway number 4 on my list. I could see people having him a couple spots higher. It's hard to see him being much lower, I think, on a list than maybe 4 or 5. But part of, I was kind of hedging between number 3 or number 4 on my list, and ultimately I put him at number 4 in part because of the injury situation. I mean, last year he endured a hamstring injury that didn't allow him to run maybe as much as he's capable of. We know he can be a dynamic runner, and then now coming off that shoulder injury, I thought 4 was about the right spot for him. But I'm going to kind of run down the list here, Kevin. Then I want I guess your general impressions of how I have the quarterbacks ranked, and maybe you see somebody who's a little high for you, or somebody that you think is a little low. So starting at the top, I start with Arch Manning of Texas, moving on to Garrett Nussmeier, LSU at number 2, Lenoris Sellers after his big season at South Carolina, number 3, DJ Lagway at 4, and then John Mateer, the Oklahoma transfer, at number 5. Continuing on at number 6, I have Austin Simmons, who steps in at Ole Miss as the starter there. Diego Pavia at number 7 from Vanderbilt. Marcel Reed of Texas A&M, number 8. And Talon Green from Arkansas, number 9. Rounding it out, I have Gunnar Stockton, the projected starter, although he hasn't been named, projected starter at Georgia, number 10. Ty Simpson, the projected starter, though unnamed, at Alabama, number 11. Blake Shapen, back from injury at Mississippi State, number 12. Jackson Arnold, who transferred from Oklahoma to Auburn, at 13. Bo Pribula, another transferred from Penn State to Missouri, hasn't been named the starter, but the presumed starter for Missouri. I have him at number 14. Rounding it out, I have Joey Aguilar of Tennessee, former starter at Appalachian State. And then Zach Calzada at Kentucky at number 16. Calzada, this will be his 7th season. You can believe that, with his 4th program. But way back in 2021, Zach Calzada started for Texas A&M in an upset of Alabama, which I think shows you the depth of talent in this conference, that all the way down, even at number 16, you got a guy who once started in a win of Alabama. So there you have it, Kevin, 1 through 16. Thoughts, impressions, and where did I go wrong?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is, and I was looking at Phil Steele last night, and look, he may have forgotten more about college football than I ever know, but he had him at tier 4 ahead of Lagway in his top 4 SEC. And I just wonder about the unproven aspect of certain guys being ranked. Maybe Diego Pavia should be ranked a little higher just because he showed that he could do it. I mean, Lagway in a small sample size showed that he could do it. But I mean, I think the question with Lagway, as you pointed out, and that's fair, is durability, because he did suffer the hamstring injury against Georgia. And the core issues, I think, probably affected his throwing in the spring too, getting healthy from that. Garrett Nussmeier, I have seen an interesting story about Garrett Nussmeier. He actually got his start as a freshman in Buchholz High School in Gainesville when his father, Doug, was the offensive coordinator under Jim McElwain here at Florida a long time ago. And I don't know if I'm as high on Garrett Nussmeier. Some people are. I mean, he gets sacked a lot, obviously, right? He's not, this dual threat guy that you need to be in college football. Arch Manning, of course, we heard what Steve Spurrier said. If he's so great, why didn't he beat out Quinn Ewers? But Lenora Sellers, I think, is the real deal. He's proven. I would have him pretty high up, and I would have DJ pretty high up based on what he's done on a small sample size. And I would have maybe Pavia a little higher, just based on, leading, a school like Vanderbilt to an upset over Alabama. I mean, that's pretty impressive. But that being said, I think it's fairly accurate list, and I think it'll be interesting. Gunnar Stockton, does he scare anyone at Georgia? That's why I think Georgia's a little vulnerable this year. That and all their losses on the line scrimmage. I think this is the year that the Bulldogs, might be able to take a step back. And if Billy Napier is going to break that schneid against Georgia, this is the year to do it, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you were coming up with a list of the 5 likeliest SEC teams to make the playoff, Georgia and Alabama would be somewhere on that list of 5 teams. I think Georgia may be a little higher than Alabama for most people, but I think both those 2 teams would be in the top 5 of likeliest SEC teams to make the playoff. But then here in my quarterback rankings, I have Stockton at number 10. Still largely unproven. I mean, he looked good in his relief appearance against Texas in the SEC championship, but then in the playoff against a tough Notre Dame defense, it wasn't all his fault. He was sacked a lot. His offensive line didn't help him that much, but he wasn't as good in the playoff against Notre Dame as he looked in the SEC championship. And he doesn't have that next level arm that Carson Beck had. For all of Carson Beck's interception woes last year, still had an elite arm. Gunnar Stockton's arm, from what I've seen of him, not bad, and he's got mobility, but it's not that next level arm like Beck. And then I have Ty Simpson at Alabama, who I think is going to be the starter, at number 11 on my list, and we just haven't seen much of him throughout his career. And he was a 5-star recruit, but this is year 4 at Alabama, and he's thrown just 50 career passes. And I wouldn't say that he's lit it up. When we saw Arch Manning last year, yes, the sample size wasn't huge, and his 2 starts while Quinn Ewers was hurt were against inferior teams. But I thought Manning looked the part of the 5-star billing, of the hype. I haven't been as sold on Ty Simpson from the small sample size that we've seen of him. So it's interesting. 2 of the two front runners to contend for the playoffs are kind of down the list in my quarterback pecking order. And as you mentioned, Kevin, I mean, you think that gives you a little bit of pause about Georgia. Does that same thinking, you think, apply to Alabama as well, with sort of the uncertainty at their quarterback position?
Yeah, and certainly coming off the season they had, and another year away from Nick Saban's recruits also, you got to wonder, as Kalen DeBoer takes this thing over, in terms of the personnel and what they're bringing in and how they identify players as to how Nick Saban identified players. I think that raises a legitimate question if Ty Simpson could be the guy. But I think there's also the thinking that they have so much talent around them that they can get by. Now, was Stetson Bennett the most talented guy? but, he led Georgia to 2 national championships. But he had a certain moxie about him, too. And those are things that are, like I said, intangibles that, are hard to measure until you get in the arena, until you get into the field. So I think there's still a lot of unknowns there for both those guys, but, maybe it could turn out to be a positive for them down the road. But I think, too, they're, coming into the season, they're not necessarily, lighting up the boards. And I think they're probably ranked appropriately, based on their talent level and their production and how they've developed at their respective programs.
When I was doing this list, I almost looked at it like in terms of tiers, and I think there's a top tier in the conference of about 5 guys. I didn't have much question of who to put in my top 5. I decided that pretty quickly. It was how to order them in my top 5. So talking about in my top 5, Arch Manning, Garrett Nussmeier, Lenoris Sellers, DJ Lagway, and John Mateer. Like those I identified. I thought they are the top 5 in the conference in terms of ceiling, in terms of ability. It was how to order them. And some people are extremely high on Mateer, the transfer at Oklahoma. And I mean, I acknowledge he was great at Washington State, dual threat, rushed for over 800 yards last year. In addition to the passing stats, he can throw on the move, throw from multiple arm angles. It's just his 2 worst passing performances last year came in his 2 games against Power 4 competition. And it is a jump from going from Washington State to playing in the SEC. Now, Cam Ward did it, obviously. He went he didn't play in the SEC, but, I mean, he proved himself at Miami after transferring from Washington State and did face Florida, an SEC opponent, at Miami. So we've seen a guy go from Washington State in recent memory and light it up at his next school. But that gave me a little bit of pause at Mateer. That's why I put him at number 5. And you kind of touched on Nussmeier. That's an interesting one because I think some people have Nussmeier at number 1 on their conference rankings of SEC quarterbacks. Some people would have him probably all the way down to 3 or 4 or 5. I mean, when you're talking about arm strength and just the quote-unquote arm talent, Nussmeier's got that. I mean, he's got a great arm with real zip on the ball. But the struggles with him, you mentioned the sacks, and then also it's the interceptions. He threw for 29 touchdown passes last year, pretty good total. But then on the flip side of that, he had 12 interceptions. And at times he forces the issue. At times he's a little too easy for the defense to read his eyes. So it's kind of give and take with Nussmeier. And I settled on him at number 2. And then Arch Manning, look, it is a little bit of a roll of the dice because we haven't seen a ton of him. I liked what I have seen of him. And that's sort of a bet on his ceiling. I think he is going to be the real deal. And you mentioned, how good Lenoris Sellers was for South Carolina last year, Kevin. And it feels like he lurks under the radar maybe just a little bit because South Carolina maybe doesn't get as much national attention as some other programs. But I'm curious if you had to rank your number 1 in the conference, who would you go with at number 1?
No, I think I would go with Sellers over Arch. But I will say the one thing working well for Arch is obviously, the supporting cast, although Texas did lose a lot on both lines of scrimmage, obviously. But I'll tell you something, like when I watched Florida play Texas, and look, it was a depleted Florida team. They were coming off, that kind of emotional loss at Georgia. DJ Lagway didn't play. They were down to Aiden Warner, was a 3rd string, obviously quarterback. All that was standing. And I know Sark took a lot of heat, obviously, for his play calling in the red zone, in that Ohio State game on the big stage. But the play calling component of that as well. I mean, I think on average, Sark is about as good as it gets in terms of keeping defenses off balance. I saw that quite a bit in that Florida game because Florida's defense was playing pretty well in the second half of the season, save for that game where Sark had them completely off balance and completely fooled with some of his play calls. So I think that's going to help Arch immeasurably too, and that his offensive mind and having that component to it as well is another factor. And I think Shane Beamer is pretty good as well, working with Sellers. So I think that's a combination that works well. Now, Billy Napier and DJ Lagway, with Billy still holding on the play calling, a little bit of to be determined there. But, Billy did let DJ air it out when he was healthy last year, and he had a number of, completions downfield. And I think Florida fans are hoping that will continue, because that's the kind of offense that Gator fans like to see.
Yeah, and I try to separate who their coach is when doing these rankings, but you can't help, I think, but at least on a subconscious level, be influenced by that. And you're right. I mean, Sark, I think, in terms of a quarterback developer, is probably as good as anybody in this conference. We worked with Mac Jones at Alabama while he was the offensive coordinator there, he just has a proven track record with quarterbacks, as does Lane Kiffin, and with Austin Simmons being at number 6 on my list. We haven't seen much of Austin Simmons. What we have seen was pretty good when he came in relief of Jackson Dart last year against Georgia and led a touchdown drive. But it's a really small sample size. But I think he's a guy with a lot of upside. But how much of that is me thinking, boy, it's been one good quarterback after another for Lane Kiffin, and the same is true with Steve Sarkisian throughout the course of his career. Has had a great hand with quarterbacks, really good play caller, as you mentioned, and Arch is going to have a good supporting cast around him. I'm wondering about the supporting cast with DJ Lagway, Kevin, because one of the issues that I see with what Florida's done with Billy Napier is I don't know if they're doing enough in the transfer portal to get impact talent out of the portal. And when I look at this past offseason, I know the recruiting class was fine, but anymore it's your high school recruits plus what you're bringing in the transfer market. And from where I sit, not just in numbers, but in terms of quality as well, I thought Florida lost more than they gained in the portal market. And when I look at the supporting cast around Lagway, and really, in totality on both sides of the ball, I think I really like DJ Lagway, especially if he's healthy. I think he's, as I have him in this list, one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, which means he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. But what do you think of the cast around him? And did Billy Napier do enough in the transfer market, do you think, to aid Florida's supporting cast?
Yeah, well, some fans were wondering why so few transfers. But I do think this is a pretty good high school class coming in. The spring game, I was pretty impressed with some of the talent I saw on the field in terms of guys. And certainly it begins with Dallas Wilson. I mean, 10 for 195 yards, 2 touchdowns. And that's not without DJ Lagway throwing to him. And this is a guy that's 6'3", 209, that, has an SEC-ready body. And I think I think he's a guy that can step in right away and be productive in the SEC. Now, Vernell Brown III, I think, might take a little more time. He might be more of a return type guy in the beginning. But Wilson, to me, 5-star talent on some recruiting sites. I mean, he looks like the real deal. And they got J. Michael Sturdivant, another big kind of sturdy receiver from UCLA, who's pretty good. They've been pretty good at identifying under the radar wide receiver talent over the years in the portal. Ricky Pearsall, obviously, Chimere Dike last year, Elijah Badger. So I think that's an area where they've done pretty well. And look, Jaden Bowe was an all-SEC freshman running back last year, too. And he's coming back for his sophomore year. Jacoby Jackson, I mean, the transfer from, a junior college, overlooked guy, ran for 116 yards against Texas last year. So I think they do have some weapons around DJ Lagway that they're going to be able to use effectively. Hayden Hansen is a serviceable tight end. He's probably more of a blocker than a receiver. You'd like to see a tight end weapon maybe emerge a little more in the offense. But I do think that, they've got some good skill position talent, and they've got a pretty good offensive line returning, obviously, with, Jake Slaughter, the All-American, 4 starters, a lot of experience there. And I think both lines of scrimmage at Florida are starting to develop into an SEC caliber line of scrimmage. I think that's been one of the big problems since Billy Napier started, is getting that right. And I think now that he has that right, I think, it will allow for more playmaking possibilities on both sides of the ball.
So much of Florida's projection for this season, I feel like, comes down to the schedule. I think with a different schedule, with, say, Ole Miss's schedule, or Tennessee's schedule. I think Ole Miss and Tennessee have a more tailor-made schedule built toward 8 or 9 or 10 wins. When you look at Florida's schedule, I mean, it is just a murderer's row. I've said on the podcast before, I think Florida and Oklahoma have the two toughest schedules, not only in the SEC, but probably in the country, or at the very, very least, they're on the very, very short list for toughest schedule conversation in the country. Florida is one of just 3 SEC teams that will play 10 Power 4 opponents. Everybody else, other than those 3, the 3 are Florida, Alabama, and South Carolina. They're playing 10 Power 4s. Everybody else in the conference is either playing 8 or 9 Power 4 opponents. And it's not just that they're playing Power 4s. I mean, not many weak links on this schedule. You just look at teams that will probably be ranked in the preseason top 25 on Florida's schedule. You have LSU, Miami, Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Those teams will probably all be preseason top 25. And so with that in mind, Kevin, and knowing what Billy Napier is facing this year, I mean, whether you want to use the word hot seat or not, the fact of the matter is Billy's facing a pivotal season, right? I mean, how much does schedule come into play? And do you think he can use that as an out at all if if Florida's on the outside looking into the playoff picture, or sitting there at 7-5, 8-4, can he point to the schedule and say, well, with a different schedule, maybe we would have been in the playoff, or maybe we would have been 9-3 or 10-2? Does that work? Does that argument work at this stage?
I still think fans want to see progress. They want to see from 8 to 9 or 9 to 10. One thing I will say that's working in Billy's favor in the schedule that didn't his first 3 years was the fact that, remember, they opened in the Swamp against Utah. Then they went to Utah. Then they had Miami in the Swamp. So this year they're facing mighty Long Island University as their first game. So at least you have a little bit of time to ease in. You have that in USF to kind of tinker with some things, get some things ready, before, obviously the end of the September, which is going to be the pivotal month, LSU and Miami. And I think having those two on the road back to back, schedule makers didn't do Florida, many favors. I mean, I could see a scenario where, maybe they play over their heads and beat LSU, but they're so beat up after that game, they go down to Miami and they lay an egg down there, because of the second of back-to-back road games. But then you get a bye before Texas, and then you're at Texas A&M. But I mean, I think those 4 games are critical. But I look at the back end of the schedule, and I will again say that, does Gunnar Stockton scare you? And is this the year that maybe you can finally get Georgia as a result of that? Austin Simmons is a guy that, talented guy. Florida recruited him a little bit. He's from the States, from Pahokee. They know him. But still a first-year quarterback at Ole Miss. And then you close at home at the Swamp against the Tennessee team with Aguilar, who you rated, is the 15th best quarterback?
Yeah.
And listen, I know Tennessee's going to have a lot of talent around him, but you get him there. Florida always plays Tennessee well in the Swamp. The back end of the schedule, to me, doesn't look nearly as daunting as it did last year. But I think the front end, obviously that late September, early October stretch. But if you can navigate that and get through that, say 2-2, 3-4, I think, you have a chance, or, 2-2 or 3-1, then you have a chance in the back end of that schedule to pick up some wins.
Yeah, Billy's just got to get there, right? And that's the other thing I wonder about is how long is the rope here? Like you mentioned, that 4-game stretch, there's a bye week factored in, but the 4-game stretch is on the road at LSU, on the road at Miami, home against Texas, and I mean the Swamp's as toughest place to play as any, but I mean even Texas is going to be one of the best teams in the country this year. Even getting home, that's a big challenge. And then on the road at Kyle Field against Texas A&M. So 3 road games in that 4-game stretch, and then the one that you have at home is a Texas team that's probably either going to be preseason number 1 or preseason number 2. Exactly. So I mean, what's Billy got to do in those first 6 games? Do you think he can get to the second half of the schedule, or is this going to come down to getting through those first 6 at like 4-2 or better?
Yeah, and I think you break it down into the first 4, that first month, September, because you remember last year 2-2, you lose to Miami and Texas A&M at Swamp. Yeah, and then you got the bye week and you got things right. I think this year the goal should be to go 3-1 in September, and then coming off the bye week, you create a little belief going into that Texas game that, hey, we can beat these guys. And we've faced, these two teams. We've on the road and we split them. We're coming home against Texas, and we can really get going here in the second half of the season. So I think that, to me, should be the goal, to win 3 of the first 4 in September. And listen, that's been an issue in the Napier era. It's a slow start. September has been a rough month for Florida under Napier, and I think this year you got to take a step forward and obviously play well in that month, so that you're not saying at the end of the year, well, we did develop and we got better during the course of the season, but you're still sitting at 8-5 because you didn't start the season with the urgency that you needed to.
All right, let's close with this, Kevin. The brass tacks on Billy Napier. He's entering year 4 at Florida. He's got a 500 record right through 3 seasons at Florida. They finished last year playing as well as Florida has at any point probably during the Billy Napier tenure, including wins against LSU and Ole Miss in the Swamp. But we know what he's facing this year. This is an important moment for him in year 4, as it would be for any coach entering year 4 who has a 500 record at their school. So I guess in evaluating his hot seat, is it A, not as warm as some people might think, B, pretty warm, C, scalding hot?
I would say A, and I think there'll be a lot of variables. And, for example, if DJ Lagway doesn't make it through the full season, I think he can use that as an out. You were discussing that before, in terms of, getting a 5th year. But I do think that they feel like, I often say all fans are entitled to his progress, and progress was made last year, from 5 wins to 8 wins. But I think fans this year are going to want to see from 8 to 9 to 10, especially if Lagway is healthy and, makes it through the full season. They're going to want to see that jump. And if they don't see that jump, then I think it's fair to question or criticize the direction of the program. But if you see that jump, and even if it's short of a college football playoff, but say it's 9 wins, including the bowl game, then I think fans will be like, all right, it's still going in a good direction. We get DJ Lagway back for another year, and move on to 26-27 with higher hopes. And I think that's kind of that should be the goal, obviously, is to just build off what they did at the end of last season and accumulate more wins. Even with this tough schedule, I think they feel like at Florida here that they've matured enough, and it's Billy's 4th recruiting cycle, and it's time to go and take another step.
I understand outlooks can change from early July to late August. So I won't hold you to this, Kevin, but if you had to project a Florida record today as we approach 4th of July, your Florida record projection would be?
I'll say 9-3. Yeah, I think they're going to be a 9-3 team during the regular season, and that might get them in the playoff. That might not, but I think they'll be on the bubble in that regard.
All right, he is Kevin Brockway. You can find all his coverage of the Gators over on Gainesville.com. Does a great job of covering Florida, and Florida is going to be one of the most interesting teams in the SEC this season, particularly when you factor in DJ Lagway coming off that shoulder situation, and as we've discussed, Billy Napier in a pivotal moment for him. You can find my SEC quarterback rankings over on usatoday.com. Kevin, thanks for joining me on the pod today.
All right, thank you.
And thank you all for listening. We appreciate it. And we'll be back next week with another edition of SEC Football Unfiltered. I believe John will be back with me next week. In the meantime, if you enjoy what you hear on the pod, always appreciate it. If you can give us a rating, hit that subscribe button, give us a review. Those ratings and reviews help us find more listeners. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.